Hi, everyone. Good. Okay, so welcome to the talk. Today we're going to talk about lessons that we've learned from The Matrix about diversity and inclusion. So this is kind of a case study. It was a little bit of a brainchild. Just go with it, okay? Originally, this talk was given at Afrotech Fest, so I've done my best to tailor it for a wider audience, but this is the original talk title, which is why we kind of switched templates. Just to refresh, my name is Chisa, phonetic pronunciation if you need it, and I am the Staff Technical Program Manager here in London, as well as a member of the Diversity and Inclusion Global Council, and I primarily support EMEA and do a lot of work with executive leadership strategy here at Pivotal. So a couple disclaimers. The way that we've approached diversity and inclusion at Pivotal has been the same way that we approach any other product, which is that we are targeted, we keep it lean, and we keep it as agile as possible. This talk, as I mentioned, was originally designed for the Afrotech Fest audience. So it was designed for a community that has already been working and living in the diversity and inclusion space. And then additionally, we acknowledge that a lot of work still needs to be done at Pivotal, within our industry, what have you. So these are simply the things that we've learned along the way and are not meant to speak to anyone being an authority on anything, but simply just observations, experiences. So my asks of you are that you keep an open mind. Questions are definitely welcome. The feedback is welcome. I may move us on if the conversation gets too deep. And then assumptions that I'm making about the audience are that you've already experienced or you already have some experience with diversity and inclusion topics. And so you have empathy for others' experiences, people at different privilege levels. I'm also acknowledging that heavy lifting is heavy and it's tiring. So doing D&I work and building empathy is not an easy thing. I'm also going to assume that you're okay with different perspectives and healthy dialogue, which is what I think that we can have here today, and that you've seen The Matrix, know what the movie's about. Yeah? Okay, that's great. And you're ready for some pop cultural references because there will be some there. If you don't get them, we can talk about it after, okay? Okay, so just really quickly, diversity versus inclusion, what's the difference? So I'm actually going to ask you, what's the difference between diversity and inclusion? Does anybody want to take a stab? Participation. Thank you. Can we discuss this? Okay. Great.
Diversity means being called to the party, and inclusion means allowed to include the movie in the party.
Excellent. Excellent. I love it. That's exactly right. So diversity means you are at the party, you are in the room, and perspectives are available. Inclusion means someone actually asked you to dance. So you've been welcomed to the room, and your perspectives carry equal weight against everyone else's, or alongside everyone else's. So why are we talking about The Matrix right now? Spoiler alert, The Matrix is kind of deep. I didn't take all the things from The Matrix because it's a 3-hour movie with a lot of things happening, but I did build a case study, so we're gonna walk through it, okay? But if you haven't seen it, you're going to learn what happens, okay? So in the movie, there is something off about the world. Something is clearly not quite right. And there are some characters who realize that things are just a little weird. Neo is a character, the main character, or one of them, and he's a relatively privileged straight white male who feels that something is missing. Also take a note that Neo has a healthy disrespect for authority, I guess you could say. He's a little bit of a rebel, and he's also quite an accomplished hacker. So he's kind of used to testing boundaries and looking at things in different ways. Morpheus sees something in Neo and offers him a choice between awareness and ignorance, red pill or blue pill. Neo chooses the red pill, and that creates some empathy, opens up some new doors, and Neo wakes up in human fields, realizing that the Matrix was a construct, and in the real world, everyone is actually just plugged in and being used as batteries for machines. Okay. Now, there are many characters within the movie that want to keep the status quo. So you may remember Agent Smith and Cypher. Agent Smith is actually a part of the Matrix, and Cypher is a human who just appreciates the way that the Matrix is set up already. And it took a long time. We just skipped the whole movie, okay, I know. It took a long time, but in the end, Neo finally understood and could see the code that was the Matrix. Okay, so this is the end of the movie when Neo sees what's going on, and he's like, oh, it's code, okay. So, just to kind of run through what happened in this film. There was a problem. Something was not quite right about the world. There was then acknowledgement when Neo took the pill at the end of the conversation with Morpheus, realizing that there was something more to be learned. He then wakes up and begins this journey of awareness, of understanding what it means to be in the real world versus in the Matrix. And it's at the end of the movie that Neo sees the code and finally understands, truly understands what is going on. And then he takes action in the sequels. Okay. So what are some immediate lessons that we can take from this movie? First of all, Neo could not do this without Morpheus, period. Someone had to help Neo see what was going on, and someone had to offer him the opportunity to take those pills, to be able to wake up. Additionally, even with direct brain uploads, seeing the Matrix took time. So apparently you can learn Kung Fu in 30 seconds, but that doesn't mean that you can reach a level of awareness or understanding or build empathy at the same rate. You can see people being farmed and still not get it or care. So in this scene, Cypher's eating steak, and he acknowledges that the steak isn't really there, it isn't real, but it tastes really good. And he would rather just eat the steak than, well, we kind of destroyed the surface of the world, so there was no like real food. We were eating processed things and what have you. So, but he was like, he basically said, you know, I would rather live in ignorance and be able to eat the steak and enjoy my life than acknowledge that there are people being used as batteries. That's okay with me because my life is good in the Matrix. Neo can surpass Morpheus because of his privilege. That's part of why he's the one. So Neo is a very special person, but there are certain places, certain people, certain interactions that can take place that Neo has access to that Morpheus would not have. And that's part of the reason, not the whole reason, but part of the reason why Neo is the one. So just acknowledging that's the case. And then lastly, messages are always easier to hear when they come from one of your own. Subcultures are a real thing in every culture, and this kind of ties back to the fact that Neo can surpass Morpheus. And I don't know if anyone's actually seen this video. I'm not going to play it, but it's basically a group of people at a restaurant in Japan, and the only one who does not speak Japanese is the one who looks the most Japanese. Everyone else at the table who happens to be an expatriate is fluent, but the waitress doesn't hear what they're saying because she's not realizing that the words coming out of their mouth, even though they're fluent, are her language because it's not coming from the right place. It doesn't look right. This has happened to me in China, and it's very interesting because even sometimes it's kind of like the fact that messages come better from your friends than they do from your mother or from your significant other. Like sometimes it's just easier to hear things when they come from a source that sits closer to you or that you're more accustomed to or that you're ready to receive the message from. Does that make sense? Okay. All right, so why is this significant to my diversity and inclusion efforts, assuming that you have diversity and inclusion efforts, which we do at Pivotal? Okay. So I think, first of all, we have to come to terms with what we're dealing with. When it comes to your reality, whatever your reality is, you are going to be the best authority on that thing. And when it comes to your organization, especially if it's an organization in an industry that isn't as aware, someone has to pull the organization forward and help them to see what's going on. So if your organization is Neo, who is that Morpheus is really the question. So diversity and inclusion work is tiring and heavy, especially when it falls on the same people all the time. And this can be a tricky thing because you tend to see a lot of people actually look like me who are pushing forward and doing a lot of the diversity work, but I shouldn't have to always be the one to do it, and I don't necessarily want to, but I also acknowledge that before allies can do the work, they need to know how and be able to do said work well. So what am I suggesting? I'm suggesting that we start handing out some red pills and create allies that are fully capable of doing the heavy lifting. So what has been our approach at Pivotal given this information? First of all, we approach diversity and inclusion with the understanding that it actually should be I&D, not D&I. When you put diversity first and inclusion second, even if you have a very diverse and a very like colorful set of perspectives, if people do not feel included and they do not feel safe or valued, they're going to leave. They won't stay. When you put inclusion first and make sure that the workplace is truly a place where everyone can thrive, it establishes a reputation, and then more people will actually want to come. Okay, well that one was tired, so I don't know what to say. Okay, look this way. Sorry, y'all. Thank you. Okay, so as I mentioned, we put inclusion first and diversity second. But note that this is not an either or, you still need both. You definitely still need both. It's simply inclusion and diversity, not diversity and inclusion. Additionally, we kind of do this already, but Shuhari is a Japanese martial art concept describing the stages of mastery. And I'm just going to kind of walk you through it. Has anyone or everyone here seen The Karate Kid? Mr. Miyagi, Daniel-san? Okay, great. So at the beginning, Mr. Miyagi was like, paint my fence, wash my car. And Daniel's like, okay, free labor, I don't know why we're doing this, but you're the sensei. So he just does what he's told, obeys the fundamentals, and does a lot of repetition. After a while, he's like, Mr. Miyagi, why do you keep making me do this? This isn't right, I'm not getting paid. And, oh, okay. And then Mr. Miyagi gives him context, and Daniel realizes that he's actually been learning a series of really useful blocks. So Mr. Miyagi puts him into context, and he realizes what he's been doing all this time. And now he has the muscle memory to be able to do it. Then, towards the end, I believe he beats the Cobras, I want to say. And he's able to take what he's learned, separate it, transcend, and create his own techniques, and use them in a context without Mr. Miyagi there at all. So something that we say a lot here is I do, we do, you do, and this is just kind of reinforcing one way that people learn, which is I'll do it first, then we'll do it together, and then you can do it alone. If you want to optimize it, I do it, we do it, you do it together, and then you do it alone, hence pairing, what have you. Something else that we do is we keep it lean. So I mentioned that we treat this like a product, which means even when it comes to diversity and inclusion work, when it comes to your HR department or your finance department, build something, measure it, and make sure that you actually have learned from it. And continue that loop. So keep it as lean as possible. And do it a lot, lots of little things. So lots of little experiments as opposed to trying to bite off big chunks. Something else to keep in mind is that when you have a diversity and inclusion department or organization, that D&I department is kind of like training wheels to your organization, which is the bicycle, your organization's culture. So eventually the goal is to be able to remove said training wheels and your organization's culture functions by itself in a healthier manner and can ride the bicycle. If a dog can do it, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Okay. And that also goes to order of operations. You don't want to start with action and doing things until you know what you're doing. Which is why, in our opinion, awareness is kind of where you enter. After you've acknowledged, you enter in awareness and then start this loop of understanding and then take action and start doing things, and then it feeds back into increased awareness. When you put action first, I think we've seen a lot of companies do this, it doesn't work as well because you're not ready. You're not ready yet. So why do we think this approach is important? And really, just to reiterate, we don't want to and shouldn't have to do this work. It shouldn't fall on the same people, but before others can do it, they need to know it and be able to do said work. So to put it simply, different people, different levels, different stages in their personal journey, we acknowledge that. So the goal, sorry, the goal is to create a working environment that is psychologically safe and equal for everyone. And I'll take another pause here. Does everyone know what psychological safety is? Everybody does. Okay. Okay. So a quick definition anyway, because I wasn't sure. It's just being able to show and employ oneself without fear of negative consequences of self-image, status, or career. So in other words, you feel safe to give feedback without worrying that there will be repercussions for something that you've said. So you feel safe to be honest. Okay, so I just want you to think about, quick question, just where does your organization think it's at now? Think it's at in this journey. A lot of organizations have already taken action, but do they really understand what the problem is? Have they really acknowledged the places where they're, where they could be better? And here are some prompts just to think about it. So, is your leadership diverse? When a D&I issue comes up, does HR know how to respond to it? Does everyone on your team feel heard? Would you recommend your company to a minority or to a minority? Do you feel as though the goals around hiring at your company are very clear and well understood by everyone? Does leadership talk about culture and how it can be improved on a regular basis? And do you feel as though the spaces at your company are equal and safe and promoting those things, are they tied to performance? Are they actually a priority? So think about where your company thinks it's at on this spectrum, okay? And does everyone have it in your head? Where your company thinks it's at? Just put like a dot on the screen in your mind. Okay, now think about where it's actually at. If you were to truly do a self-assessment, would they be in the same place? Would they be in a different place? Does anyone feel comfortable sharing? Okay, let me grab the cash box for you. Ready?
A lot of cups.
There you go.
Oh, I think the big discrepancy on our side is the difference between being proactive and being reactive. The certain concerns that I have raised have been, the response has often been essentially that we don't have an employee in that situation, so we don't have a plan for that yet. And I think that betrays a certain concern that they need to, that it views some type of diversity as an inconvenience, particularly in this case, people with non-physical disabilities as well as people with disabilities. So I found that having raised concerns about both invisible illness and visible disabilities has led to not necessarily the best response I want, because it's not a problem we're addressing right now.
Mm-hmm.
So for a while we were building, I'm putting her on blast. we were working a building that just didn't have wheelchair access, and the response was essentially like, "There's no one here in a wheelchair." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, what?" And I brought this up a few times, and the response was like, "We'll work on it." I was like, "What?" So yeah, I think that's our biggest concern. Is like there's really good intention, which I think you see a lot with DNI, like it's really thoughtful intention. I just would prefer if we were active versus reactive. Like I don't want them to wait until there's an emergency when I have someone come to the office.
Yeah. Anyone else? Thank you for sharing. Over here? I'll catch you back and then I'll. Yeah. Awesome. Ready?
That's the most stressful part of this. Yeah, it's interesting. So we'll have a question for you. So I work at a startup, which is super lean, and therefore the priorities right now are not going out of business on a day-to-day basis. And at some point, if you grow, and I think I've seen a lot of startups go through this, where you start with like 2 people, you grow your team, Today's problem is not diversity and inclusion, it's how do I get to the end of the day with money in my bank account. At some point, that's not gonna be a problem anymore, but I don't know when that, it's not very clearly defined. And so how can we think about that now, or how do we, without actually sitting it, kind of thinking about it, go how many times? And I always wonder about this, because we care about it, and we want to build a culture that works, but we also need to close funding, make the business work, all the other things that are kind of in the midst of this. And yeah, and I think a lot of startups that I look at down the line aren't doing this, and I'm scared that we're on that track just because they were thinking exactly the same we were, which is this is a real problem, but it's just not today's problem. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because okay, let me catch first and then talk. Okay. It's kind of like when imagine a dancer, right? I think ballet is one of the most technically difficult forms of dance. If your muscles aren't formed as a child and you decide at the age of 30 that you want to be a ballet dancer, you can still be a ballet dancer, but it won't be at the same level of proficiencies if you had started when you were 10. And I think it's interesting because when companies are forming, they don't think about that some things can't come after and still be just as good of an experience across the board. A good example of that would be seatbelts. They only tested on dummies that were 6 feet and like 180 pounds. So basically men. And once they started putting women and slightly smaller people in the front seat, they were dying. And you would think that would kind of be a simple thing that, well, shouldn't we be testing on lots of different body types? But it wasn't, right? And it's about getting the MVP out. And I think it's kind of a give and take. And oftentimes it's important to have the conversation about, well, we can't solve for all the things, but let's have a conversation about what we are solving for and be clear about why we decided to solve for those things and not all of them. So that was great. Any other comments or shares around? Okay. So we did that. And I think obviously different companies are in different stages, but the reason that I call out awareness as being so important is because I think that this is that stage or that spark that people overlook. And they don't realize building awareness then builds that empathy to then lead to some type of an action. And it's important because when this is missed, and it's the most impactful step, this is where the learning and the empathy is built. This is how you build up all of I guess that investment of understanding why something is important. Like as you increase your awareness, you understand why something is important. And that then makes it possible for conversations to be had about what action looks like. So calling this out again, in my mind, awareness is the entry point, and it's important to figure out ways, how can you continue to increase awareness, continue to make opportunities for people to learn, so that when it does come time to do something, they feel empowered and incentivized to do something, whether it's intrinsically or due to some external reason. So we kind of have identified some pains that you felt working with this and just increasing awareness, but like specifically around raising awareness in your organization. Does anyone have any other examples of a time where they've had difficulty kind of bringing something to light, having a difficult conversation at their organization or with someone that they'd like to share?
Yeah. All right. So I actually worked on a similar position to try to promote diversity inclusion on previous company, and we've been having a lot of activity, which is pretty successful. But one of the things that, or the difficulties I found is that the awareness kind of stuck in the similar places. Like those are some people that I care about least. So those are the people that come to join the event, and I try to reach out to those people that might not have those kind of opportunity. So I reach out to my manager for one topic about the like diversity education, how do you do that in daily life and to your children next generation. And I got a response like, oh, that's how, everybody knows, respect that, respect this. But his attitude is not actually what he says. So that's kind of like awkward to me. First, he's my boss. And secondly, I held the event, and that was a very rare rejection. So yeah, so that was kind of, yeah, that was again some kind of example for you guys.
Are there any others that anyone feels comfortable sharing? Okay. Well, some other examples are lip service from leadership, where we say we're changing, but then nothing actually happens. For instance, no money or time is actually given to do the activities that would promote change. Or diversity inclusion is not recognized as a business value, which is something that was already mentioned. Or there aren't policies in place, which is also mentioned, to actually do anything to protect me. So these are some examples that I've heard in the past around what this might look like. Okay. So what should I take away from today? This is a list of just 9 lessons that we've learned. There are obviously a lot more, but these are 9 things that stuck out. The first one is that leadership needs to be fully engaged, all of them. When you think about organizational culture, oftentimes that culture is created, molded, shaped, and guided by your leadership. And given anyone within the company can be a leader at any time. But if leadership at the top isn't saying these things and promoting these things, then it's actually really difficult to change the culture because you won't have the type of backing that you need. Additionally, it's important to support things with data. So if you're trying to build a case, and this goes for both qualitative and quantitative data, it can be very hard to prove something to someone if you don't have numbers or don't have direct anecdotes to back information up. And I think this goes for more than obviously the D&I, really just period. So be very clear on what data looks like and what is it that you're trying to prove. And this also helps you to think through what is it that you're trying to say or what is it that you're trying to articulate. Also, when you do start something, start where you're most likely to succeed. So pick a part of your organization that is already somewhat aligned. Don't start with the most toxic section of your company. And you know, within companies, there tend to be some sections that are already ready and receptive to have conversations, and then there are others that are not quite, right? Not quite as ready. So start in a place where you're most likely to succeed, where you'll be able to easily align and find partners to help try things out. And then have a communication strategy. So organize the lended voices that you do have, and make sure that you know what you want them to say. Oftentimes, there are tons of people who have more privilege than me that are around me, and they just don't know what to say. They don't know when they should be saying something, how to exercise their voice, and simply saying, hey, if you want to help, just send this email out the next time there's an event. Tell people that you're going. Tell them about the results of doing this thing or how great it was. Sometimes it's as little as that, but knowing and being ready so that when people do ask, how can I promote this, what can I say, you're ready to say, this is what you can say. And also, starting to tell people and show people the journey creates FOMO, because then people are like, well, wait, what's happening over here? So if you're able to talk about the changes that are happening, it helps because then people have visibility into what's going on. Also, make sure to revisit your little experiments, and I put little in here on purpose. Don't bite off big chunks. It's a lot of little steps, a lot of little activities, a lot of small events happening consistently that will start to move the needle forward. And this is really big. This is really big. Diversity and inclusion is not an HR thing. It's an organizational culture thing. It's not something that is the responsibility of your human resource department. It's the responsibility of your culture as a whole to think about, what do we want our culture to look like? Oftentimes when someone in D&I is hired, they're hired into HR, they sit underneath HR, and HR is actually oftentimes the place where policies need to get changed. So if the policy body is the body that also houses the change agent, it can be a little bit difficult to affect that because you're not getting a neutral perspective. So make sure that your company is really thinking clearly about how they're structuring where they're putting these efforts. Because organizational culture and human resources are two different things. So where are those being placed? Also, change cannot happen without time and money. So if D&I or culture is treated as an extracurricular, that's exactly what it will be. It will be optional. I think this speaks to what you were saying about the fact that, yeah, no, we respect each other, but everything else is optional. If it's treated like that, that's how people will feel. So some people will opt in and others will not. Whereas if it's simply a default, we expect everyone to understand that these things are important. It changes things. So are you only allowed to do these types of things outside of your core hours? Or is it part of like the core competency of what you're expected to do? Is there something within your job description that, especially as managers, right, that asks or tests to make sure that you are being measured on the fact that you are creating spaces where everyone can thrive and be successful? If not, that might be something to talk about or to ask about. Also, having a D&I committee does not make you legit. Just because your company has a diversity and inclusion organization or team, that doesn't mean that it's doing everything that it needs to. So I think we all understand what's going on in this gift. So then lastly, learning takes a lifetime, and for some people, they are learning a completely new skill or culture. And I think this can be a really difficult one, especially when you have people within your company at lots of different levels. There are some things that I have been living my whole life that others have never had to deal with. Like I've always been able-bodied, so, well, except for that time that I tore my ACL twice. But anyway, the point is, learning and understanding the experience of someone else. In that space, I am very ignorant and very uneducated. But in other areas, I know a lot. So understanding that for some of these conversations, it's just going to take time, and if you don't have the power or the energy to explain what it is, find someone who does have the time or the energy because it's not their immediate reality, and get them to talk about it. So, okay, I know that you're wondering, okay, when I leave today, what are the things I can do right now? So first of all, think about what is your first experience? When you leave here today, what is that thing that you want to set up and do and try? Is it reasonable? Is it actionable? And how will you measure it? How do you know that it'll be successful? How do you define it? And what do you want to learn from it? So think about what that first experiment is that you can do, that you can build, that you can measure, and that you can learn from. Also, get empowered. Empower yourself, and also work to make sure that you are truly empowered by your leadership to do the things that you want to do. Don't expect something that people don't have the capacity to give yet. And this speaks to the fact that people are at different levels. Reset your expectations. When you do ask for something, make sure that it's very clear, and make sure that you get a very clear yes or no. I think oftentimes people will say, oh yeah, I'd love to participate, I'd love to get involved, yeah, I'll be there. But be very clear. Being there and supporting means you can do this thing, or you can support me in this way. Can you do it? Yes, no. Either response is fine, but make sure that the asks are very clear and you get firm response, like firm confirmations or otherwise. And then do ask for help. Find partners for this journey. Don't try to do this by yourself, because it's very tiring, it's very hard, and it's a long haul activity. And then watch The Matrix, if you haven't seen it yet, or maybe you want to rewatch it because you're inspired. Yeah. So, are there any questions or comments?
I'm curious about the part that you say to check back up with data. How do you have any example? How did you use data to support your promotion of diversity and equity? Thank you.
I think oftentimes people people think that their companies are more diverse than they are. So when you say, but show me the actual numbers, it becomes very clear. Like when you have actual data, and I know that it can be a little tricky legally to collect certain information depending on where you're at, but I think we do self-identification, so people can choose to identify as underrepresented minority. And when they do, we can kind of look at that, and when we do take surveys to see how are people feeling about their experience in the company, you can kind of see, is the experience of the people who do identify as URMs, is it different from the majority? But having actual data makes it very, very easy to say, well, you're saying that the company's diverse, but there are only like 20 people here that look like me, you know, so how is that, you know? And the other thing is, when you ask the question of, well, how are we measuring diversity? Are we talking about gender diversity? Are we talking about ableness? Are we talking about neurodiversity? So giving your company the vernacular to be able to make sure that you're defining and asking, what does this look like? Then makes it easier to have the conversations with facts about what needs to change. So that's with quantitative data. On the qualitative data side, providing spaces and opportunities where people can anonymously share actual anecdotal stories about what they've gone through really helps, because then there's nothing to dispute. If someone has actually had this happen to them in the company and they were safely able to share it anonymously, then when you do go to talk about it, you have those qualitative data points to say, these are the experiences of people that are actually having it in the company. We can't deny that these things are actually happening. So those would be two ways, because oftentimes when things are shared with certain groups, the story or the message will be tailored to make that group look not so bad or to look better. So it's already been modified, but if something is being sent and then anonymized or edited by a completely neutral body, it makes it a lot easier to keep the data that you do collect, whether it be qualitative or quantitative, significant.
So you mentioned at some point that you need to have a support of leaders in your organization. So what do you do when you don't have that? So you're really starting from scratch.
Ooh, yeah, it's kind of tough because if the leaders of your organizations don't want to roll the windows down and they're the ones that have the window power, how are you going to get the windows down? You know, unless everyone else in the car is saying it's hot, roll the windows down. So the only, well, not necessarily the only way, but I think if leadership isn't on board, it has to be an issue for enough people that it makes leadership work. You know, so, and that's why that tends to be more difficult, because effectively what happens is you have to create enough momentum at whether it be a grassroots level or at a management level that people understand this is a thing. And oftentimes for leadership, it's a question of like, well, how's this affecting our money? Like this isn't profitable. Or am I going to have a legal issue if this thing gets out? You know, I mean, and so if you can tailor and make your messages very clear and speak to the things that matter to them, sometimes it's easier for that message to be received. But it can be it's very tricky if leadership isn't involved, because again, you either have to get enough people saying the same things within the company, or you have to show how, honestly, it doesn't make sense for us not to do this, because whether again financially or from a legal standpoint, this is a risk. So basically, it's proving the case or getting enough, in my experience, or getting enough people saying the same things that like they can't not look, they can't not acknowledge it.
So one of the kind of big problems that I've seen in other companies with D&I is that when you have a workforce where visible minorities are in an extreme minority, like just really, really a small part of the whole workplace demographic, what ends up happening a lot of the time is it's really difficult to create a safe space for people to talk about DNI where you don't just end up with everybody feeling marginalized. Because like people from visible minorities are in a definite, I don't know what to say, like a definite and tiny minority, and they feel like, well, there's nobody who looks like me here, then everybody else is kind of like, well, what makes you special? Why are your problems so much bigger? Like, why should we be talking about this in DNI and not the fact that, like, you know, loads of us come from working class backgrounds and you can't see that.
Yeah.
How do you create that safe space? What would you tell people?
It's really tough. A couple things that I've done is I'll start with a cause that sits closer to the intersections of the people that I'm trying to relate to, which I mean means that again, like you're still as a minority catering yourself to someone else. But start with a cause that relates closer to what other people might relate to, or areas that where you're suffering the same thing. So for instance, one might be thinking about benefits, different types of benefits, because regardless of, for instance, race or ethnicity, everybody has health needs, or if you have families, that might be one. So, you know, kind of start to practice conversations around how you build empathy. The other side of it is when you do find effectively find like a neo who you know is closer to line but just doesn't quite get it yet, start to build them up so that, because they're the ones that are going to be able to echo what needs to be said for you. And that's effectively what Morpheus had been scouring the earth to do. He'd been scouring the earth to find someone with potential to be able to speak for groups that were not being heard, right? And again, it's a tricky line, but even today, there are times where if I say something, I know it's not going to be heard, so I find a white man to say it for me, honestly, and then people hear what was said. And find people with the right kind of privilege or who look similar and help them to understand what it is you're trying to say. And I think on the flip side, for those that do have that type of privilege, I think it's important for all of us to realize where and when we have privilege and how to exercise it. Like, I think one thing for me that I realized, I have privilege simply by working here, and I can open the door for other people to come in and see the space, not even use it, just see the space and see what's possible. Right, because there are a ton of people within my community that don't even realize that this is a place that they could work and this is a place they could be. And there are other people around you who don't have quite the same privileges as you, and sometimes it's as little as just watching and listening, and that's all you need to do. You just need to listen, and that's it. So again, I think it can be kind of tricky, and it's a nuanced thing, but those would be the suggestions off the top of my head. If anyone else has any others that they want to suggest, please feel free to
You talked about little experiments that people could do, and that they should think about what little experiments they could do in the workplace. And I wondered if you had some examples of the experiments that people could do.
Yeah. So one would be, for instance, if something has happened on a team and you realize that there's an opportunity to talk about it, create a conversation around it, and then at the end, ask people what they thought about the conversation. Ask people if after having the conversation, they started to notice things that they didn't see before, right? Like I think everybody, after we saw the Matrix, we had second thoughts about what deja vu was, right? Like we were thinking about, is this a glitch in the Matrix, or is that just like something going on in my mind, right? But when something is brought to your attention, you become aware of it. When you buy a red car, you start seeing red cars everywhere, right? So coming back around to ask, hey, did you notice if anything changed after we had this conversation? That's one example. Another might be simply, you know, we notice that there are no like ramps, and when we do have someone, how are they going to get in the building? Is there a simple way that we might be able to test out or try to do this? Or it might be light levels, it might be temperature in the office. Hey, we've noticed that there is one group of people in the office that is always really cold. Maybe we could try the temperature in a different place, you know? So I mean, again, it's just lots of little things. And the other thing is, like, oftentimes it's not, people think it's about D&I, it's not. It's about how can we make the lives of the people that work here better. right? And that's where it's a shift from really thinking about diversity and inclusion and really just culture. Because if you want to create an inclusive culture where everyone is welcome, you have to make sure that that culture encapsulates everyone who's there. So oftentimes the conversations that we have, they don't necessarily have to do with like the hot topic buckets around diversity and inclusion. They have to do with how can we make sure that when people want to have events here, it's clear about what information is necessary so that, for instance, our happiness team doesn't have to field the same exact questions all the time, right? How can we make sure it's easy for other pivots to know what needs to happen? And there are tons of little opportunities like that based on the experience that you have, based on, for instance, maybe your tenure at a company that you can start to pick up and just make changes around, right? And by doing that, you were effectively helping to make the culture at your company better. But it's just a question of being proactive and keeping your eyes open. That was a great question. Are there any others in the back?
So, you mentioned the thing like psychological safety.
Mm-hmm.
So it's how confident people are to ask questions, to not feel like it's going to impact their careers. But in some way, the lack of psychological safety is blocking people from advancing towards it. So how can a person address that, or
Yeah.
a team?
Yeah, so I think as a team, it's important to talk, like as a team, have a conversation around what is psychological safety, what does it mean, what does it look like, and why is it important? What do teams look like when there isn't psychological safety? And we have a workshop that we just started trying out here. And the example in it is actually really good because it talks about nursing teams that have psychological safety versus nursing teams that don't. The ones that do feel safe to, for instance, question a doctor when a medication that a patient has been prescribed doesn't look right. Those hospitals have a much lower rate of medication than the ones where nurses don't feel comfortable saying something or double checking, right? So that's a situation where it's literally life or death. If people do not feel safe to say something, patients are at a higher risk. So having hypothetical conversations around what does safety look like on our team, in our setting, having conversations around, or even just taking a survey, do people actually feel safe? Like how, and it's not a question like, do you feel safe? It's, I feel comfortable questioning a technical decision that was made. You know, I would feel comfortable saying it to the entire group or just to a certain individual team, but I know that they would hear me and help me to get the message out. I feel as though I'm being allowed to exercise all of the skills, all of my best skills, and that those are taken advantage of by the team and leveraged well. You know, so you can kind of do like a survey to get a sense of how safe do people feel on the team. You know, you can even have a quick safety check before a group conversation to say, do people feel comfortable, anonymous, right? Do people feel comfortable having this conversation, or should we maybe do it some other time? And then you can also provide different ways, different skills that people can use to make communication better. So for instance, how can you make sure in a meeting that everyone is allowed to speak? Or how can you make sure that respect or expectations are set around what that would look like? How can you make sure that when you engage with people, you're making sure that they know that they're being heard, or even just taking the time to understand people's differences, because some people don't like to look at you when they're talking, and that's perfectly fine. But then have a conversation and ask, hey, are there certain ways that you like to work that I should be aware of? And I'll tell people, don't come at me in the morning. I'm better at night, you know? But ask the question, get to know people, build up that social capital because it helps. And I think all of those types of things help to build psychological safety on the team. But again, it's just have a conversation. Does everyone actually feel this way? Do we know what it means? What might this look like, and how does it manifest? So, great question. Any others? Great. Okay.
Okay, well, thank you so very much. Really greatly appreciate it.